This program on Northeast Indian writers essentially focuses on Northeast Indian writers in English. It aims to show that Northeast Indian literature is making a huge impact on the rest of the country, and it is hoped that such a program will be of interest to students of literature as well as researchers in this subject. We have based this program on some interviews with these writers, taken their views and their expressions on creativity, their thematic concerns, their concern for their own cultures, their harking back to the past, to the folk tradition and oral tradition of the region. This uniqueness is grafted in their writings, and this has attracted the attention of literary critics all over the country. It is hoped that such a program will be of interest not only to students but also to the general public.
As a student of literature, I have always been interested in the craft of writing, and I began slowly because my first book of poetry was published only in the year 1988. And once I started writing, I continued to do so, and there came a time when I wanted to find out if I was any good at writing fiction also. And so the process continues. Though I have lived in towns and cities all my life, I'm basically a very rustic village person, and I have deep rooted sense of belonging in my native place, as you put it, and because of that I took up the project of writing about the oral tradition of the Aunagas, and it has been received well by the readers, and it has gone into the second edition.
Most of my inspiration, the source for my writing, is drawn from Arunachal, the lands and the people I meet, especially in rural areas, in the villages. I like to listen to their stories. I like to hear about a way of life, that is already changing very fast in today's Arunachal Pradesh. And The Legends of Pensam, my first novel, is also based on notes taken during traveling through different parts of Arunachal. Actually, when I wrote The Legends of Pensam, I was not having an agenda, of what I wanted to convey through this writing. If there was anything like that, it was mainly to record something, to document something about an area, a land and its people that was changing so fast. But what happened was, when the book was out and then it was released in Delhi, people in my hometown heard about it, and they were quite agitated. It was a moving response, because they said, what are you doing? You bring it to Pasighat. Why can't we get it here immediately? We are the people of Pensam, because the novel is based on my hometown, Pasighat. So that brought an awareness, or a greater consciousness about the role of writing. We write as witnesses. We're not social activists as such, or reformists, or political figures, but because we witness something that really moves us and we put that into words, it becomes an act, that people feel is quite important, and that brings on some social responsibility of the writer.
My writings have everything to do with who I am and where I am located. And so my native place is something that is very important to me. This was something that I never really understood when I was studying outside my own state. But when I came back, I realized that I had a wealth of knowledge that was stored within me, which had been passed down to me from stories that I had heard from my grandmother, my mother, my father, stories about my great-grandmother, stories from my father that told me everything about how important it was to preserve tradition. And so when I started writing, I found that I could not get away from the stories that had been told to me by my father, as I said, and my father, my mother, my grandmother. And I found that I was writing about them, and I found that these were stories that caught my attention, and somehow they prompted me, they told me that these were stories that had to be told to the rest of the world, which was the result, as a result of which I brought out my first collection of poems called Oral Scriptings, where I talk about the myths and legends of our land. And I begin the book with a story about the lost script. Now, this story about the lost script is something that many communities in the Northeast share with each other. Now, amongst the Khasi community, the lost script was something that was lost by the Khasi messenger who went and took it from God, because he had to cross a river and he swallowed the script. Now, this fact of swallowing the script is something that played upon in my imagination, it played upon my mind, and I realized that central to my understanding of my own culture was the fact that we did not have a script. Now, why is it that we never had a script? Was because the messenger had swallowed the script, and therefore something important was taking place, because the script now became the empowering factor, and the fact that it had been swallowed also spoke about the fact that we could not write, but we could speak.
I basically come from a very urban background. I'm from Shillong, Meghalaya, and my love for writing goes back to the time when I was in school, and perhaps the schooling that we got from the Christian brothers played a very major role in my wanting to write and my being able to write. I've written a book called Who the Cap Fits, that basically deals with the angst and the frustration of the youth, and how militancy came about and why it came about. I tried to basically talk about all that. At this festival, the Calm Festival, we just launched a book called my book called A Point of View, which has one section that is poetry and another section that is photographs. I'm really grateful to the organizers of Calm, because I think this festival has managed to bring together a lot of talent, and I've managed to actually bring to the forefront the writings of the Northeast, which I think is very important, because most of the writings are based on what happens here. It's based on the feelings of the people here, and perhaps these books can become a bridge between us and the rest of India. You know, too often people tend to think of the Northeast as just one big unknown blog, you know, in the country. But as they go through the books that come from here, the understanding of the region, the understanding of the minds of the people here will lead to perhaps a better relationship and perhaps a more cordial relationship with the rest of the people. I think that is something that is very important.
Diego, point of view. Thank you.
This region is huge and very rich in writings of different kinds. I'm not talking only of writings in English, though I write in English. But to begin with my state, we are very rich in the local languages. Assamese literature is extremely rich, as is well known, and it is through translation, it is known in fact throughout the country. And Manipur similarly is very rich in their own local languages, and also through translations it is going out. And there is a huge upsurge of writing in English from this region, and there are many who have made a very good mark from this region. Mamang Dai from Arunachal Pradesh, Temsula Ao, and also younger people who are doing indeed very well. Janice Paryat from Meghalaya itself, Anjum Hassan. These are very, very extremely good writings that are now being read, mainstream if you would like to use the word, all over the world and all over the country. So I feel because the stories from this region have not yet been heard so much by the rest of the world, the kind of things that are important to us, the kind of stories that we have grown up with and we are familiar with are now being projected outside, and because of its newness, it is generating actually a very good response. And I don't really think that there is a lack of response, because if it is well written, the names I have mentioned, they have been writing very well. If it is well written, it will get a lot of response. Poetry and everything, it is getting a lot of response. Khimphan Singh Nongkingri, Robin Nangom, these are well-known poets from these regions.
It is sometimes felt that the northeastern region of the country is not portrayed enough or in the correct perspective in the rest of the country. Now let us have a look as to what these writers think on this very, very contentious issue.
There are many reasons why the Northeast feels neglected, feels that it is not projected in the correct light. But we will not go into that. As far as literature is concerned, I can say this with a lot of conviction that the writers emerging from the Northeast are, or let me put it this way, that the writings from the Northeast have put the entire region into the vacant slot of the map of India, and people are sitting up and taking notice, and because of that we as writers feel that we are acting as the link between mainstream India and the rest in the Northeast, and for that reason alone I must commend the writings that are coming out of the Northeast, because they are as good, if not better, than much of the writing that goes on elsewhere.
There has been a lot of interest in writing of writings coming from the Northeast region of India. And one must remember, you know, when you say Northeast region, NER, it's a very diverse area. It's not as if Nagaland is the same as Meghalaya, or Meghalaya is the same as Sikkim, or Sikkim, Manipur, Tripura, Arunachal are all similar with the same people. You know, we share this geographical space. We're connected even through our rivers and, you know, forests. We're all connected, but there are very marked or remarkable differences and distinctions between the different states, and this should be known. I think people should pay attention to this.
As a writer, I think, as writers in Northeast India, I think we have a big responsibility, which is that we have to, I will use a word that I don't really like to use, but for want of a better word, we have responsible to showcase our culture. We are responsible for telling people who we are. Now, the only way in which we can tell people who we are in a very human way is to actually talk to people through our writings, tell people, start a conversation with people whereby people from the rest of the country will be able to understand who we are. Now, for instance, I am a Khasi writer, I am a Khasi woman coming from a matrilineal society. Now, the very fact that I come from a matrilineal society is something that's very important to me, because my children will take my name, and I uphold a social tradition that has actually been able to withstand the ravages of time. And so, my husband stays with me in the house of my parents, which would seem to be very strange to people from outside, but which is the accepted thing in my society. Because what the rest of the world has to understand is that gender roles is something that has been, well defined in Khasi society. So when my husband comes to stay with me in my house, he is the father of my children, but at the same time, he is also uncle to his sister's children. Something that I have not mentioned earlier, which is a very interesting fact, is that it has been said that Khasi society was actually patriarchal, and that the men were actually warriors who went to fight in order to preserve the Khasi homeland. But they found that in going out to fight, the population was getting decimated. So the men made a policy decision to hand over their titles to the women, so that the women would be the custodians of culture and the custodians of the land. And this is the reason why we changed over from patriarchal society to the matrilineal society. Now, this is something I have discussed in my book of essays, and I would hope that this book, which has actually been sold out, I would hope that this book would be an eye-opener to the rest of the world, so that they'll be able to understand that Khasi society is something that has not existed in isolation. And in fact, what I have also pointed out is the fact that Khasi society is also in a state of transition. It is examining itself, examining whether the foundations of the matrilineal society is something that is worth keeping still. And I would say that for many youth, for many young people, this dialogue is still continuing, but the bedrock, the Khasi bedrock of the matrilineal structure is something that continues. It will continue to be interrogated, and any society that allows itself to be interrogated is a healthy society.
We have seen that there is tremendous potential of creative writing in Northeast India. This program has mainly focused on creative writing in English, both poetry and fiction. Now, what lies ahead in the future? Is there a feeling of optimism? Let us find out what these writers have to say in this regard.
There's a huge upsurge of new writers. That's the very encouraging thing, is that there's a huge upsurge of new writers coming up from this region, and I think that stories from this region are in good hands. They will be projecting it. And another area which I think is very promising here is translations, because through translations the local languages, the stories, the beautiful stories and the myths and the legends in the local languages, these can be accessed and placed before the rest of the world. So I think it's, yes, very bright.
Writers from Northeast India have something very different to offer, not only to India but to the rest of the world. If one looks at Mamang Dai's book of short stories, Pensam, if one were to look at Temsula Au's latest collection of poetry, if one were to look at some of Kimpam Singh Nonkandri's poetry, if one were to read some of my poems, I think what we have to offer to the rest of the world is the fact that we have to go back to the past. We have to go back to a past which has till today remained unrecorded.
The future of writing or the future for writers in Northeast India is quite positive. If we talk amongst ourselves, if we have literary meetings, I'm quite particular saying, it has to be amongst ourselves first, then you build up, something. You take the question of language, for instance. Okay, we are writers writing in English. There are many good writers writing in their languages, in their mother tongue. So we have to think about translation also. But other than that, because I was talking about the Northeast Writers Forum, which was basically to promote writers writing in English from the region. Now the English language question, we are actually doing a double process of translation. We are translating from our mother tongue. If we're writing about life in a small village, say in the hills of Arunachal Pradesh, I have to enter into that world, think in another language, which is my mother tongue, or which may even be a different language, because there are so many languages in Arunachal, there are so many mother tongues, and then you are translating that back into English. And you're not translating just the language, you're translating the whole ambience, the atmosphere, the background. So this is a kind of double process. But if you can bridge that, if you can bring the images of that particular region into writing in English, then I think you can create a world that is really quite new and wonderful, not only for the reader, even for yourself. And it's like a journey of discovery, and even our oral traditions, the myths, the legends, they become a source of sustenance. It's not just a story. There's a whole life behind that word. So if we can appropriate this and create a kind of new imagery, then I think the writing of the region will be very positive and have something to contribute.
It is very positive, because not only English, but there are many vernacular writers who are going back to their histories, to their legends, and adding to the bulk of literature that already exists in the vernacular languages. And even the writers who use the English language to articulate their thoughts find inspiration from the oral traditions that still survive in these communities in the Northeast. One good prospect for writing in the Northeast is that these could be collected, these could be documented, and these could be used as, teaching tools to bring to, or to, how shall I put it, to make the young people aware of their origins. The legends and myths and folk tales and folk songs, they are an integral part of the existence of the northeastern tribes, and they could become textbooks in the syllabi of the schools and colleges around here.
In the mid-90s, the Northeast Writers Forum was formed in Guwahati, where a group of writers writing in English established links with their counterparts in Shillong and formed the Northeast Writers Forum. Gradually, the Northeast Writers Forum spread all over the Northeast, and right now it covers all the states of Northeast India. It has a constitution, it has an organizing body, it organizes events almost every year in different parts of the Northeast, not only in Guwahati. It organizes events in Guwahati, Shillong, Agartala, Aizawl, Gangtok. So Northeast Writers Forum is really a force to reckon with, where these writers reach out to writers in other parts of the country, invite them for their meets, and the Northeast Writers Forum also brings out periodically a literary journal.
That was a beautiful book for a person from India practicing the Hindu religion like me. And your insights into Buddhism. I'm sorry if I'm taking too much of time from the audience, but I couldn't help listening it for the record. That's a book worth reading twice. Thank you very much.
This program ties up the different strands that emerge in the creative writers in Northeast India, especially the ones who write in English. For example, it tries to give an insight to the viewer as to what the writers think about their own writing, their perceptions on their traditional moorings, their views on their own indigenous societies, the history of these societies, and how these writers try to establish a dialogue between themselves and the writers in different parts of the country. It is hoped that such a program will give more than a glimpse of what is happening in Northeast India vis-a-vis creative writing in English.